Hello and welcome to my tutorial on creating high dynamic range images with Photoshop HDR Pro. In this tutorial, we will learn how to merge images from Adobe's Lightroom into Photoshop using HDR Pro, and then process our merged file into a final image using Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop. Let's start off with what is HDR. HDR images capture the range of intensity of light found in real scenes to more accurately represent what we see. HDR images are created by combining a number of identical images exposed for different lengths of time using your camera's bracket feature. If your camera has the bracket function, you can set your camera to capture images at specified brackets automatically. If your camera does not have this feature, you can manually bracket images by changing your exposure compensation adjustment between shots. When capturing images that will later be merged for HDR, it's best to use a sturdy tripod to avoid camera movement that will ultimately result in a blurred image after processing. How many images are needed? Well, that's a personal preference. I used to shoot 5 images at 0.7 stops, 2 underexposed, a middle exposure, and 2 overexposed. However, I found that at 0.7 I did not have enough variation in exposure to result in a broad enough dynamic range, which often resulted in a flat image. So I now shoot 3 images at 2 stop intervals. However, there is no right way, and my best suggestion is to experiment with to see what provides you with the results you're looking for. Regardless of the number of brackets captured or the exposure stop interval, the technique I'm about to demonstrate can be used to merge and process your HDR images in each case. So let's get started. As you can see, I've already got 3 images here available to me. The image on the left is exposed at -2. The image in the middle is a even exposure, and then the image on the right is a +2. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually select all 3 images. So you do this by clicking on your first image, let's a left click, holding down the shift key, moving to the furthest image to the right, left clicking again, and you'll see that all 3 images are now selected. I tend to use mouse functions, so I'll try to describe them. So what we're going to do now is right click on any of the images to get the menu here, and as you can see, you can edit in. So when you go to edit in, I have a lot of things in my options, but what we are going to do is actually select down here at the bottom, merge to HDR Pro in Photoshop. This will actually combine these images and straighten these images and whatnot automatically. So we're going to go ahead and right click on the image, any one of them, and you'll see a drop down menu here. There's a lot of options, but the one we're going to work with right now is Edit In. You can see right away that it has Edit in Adobe Photoshop, but in this case we're not going to actually open straight away into Photoshop because we need to merge these images. So to do that, we're going to scroll down to the bottom and choose Merge to HDR Pro in Photoshop. So we're going to select that. Now what the program is doing is going to activate Photoshop, and then Photoshop is going to sort through these 3 images, take a look at the different exposures, and align the images and put them all together into a single layer. So we're going to go ahead and let that run for a moment. This particular process can be done on RAW files or JPEGs, just depending on how you shoot. Although I would say that you should get in the habit of shooting RAW if your camera allows you to do so, because that'll give you the most data possible to play with in your post-processing, and then you can always create a JPEG later when you're ready to export and share with friends. So as you can see, our images are now blended into a single image. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner the 3 individual images, and it gives you the exposures that Photoshop has identified. And then in the top right, you can see it has remove ghosts. This may be useful to you if you have taken an image where there are people walking through, or even just standing around and there's a little bit of movement. What you would do is come down to your bottom left-hand corner and select an image, click on it, although it's not seeming to light up. Like maybe if we hit remove ghosts. So I checked remove ghosts. And then I can select any one of these images, and what that allows me to do is select the image that's going to be the primary image for the ghosting. So we can go ahead and leave that. I think it might take a little bit longer in processing, but it's not going to be significant. The next thing that you're going to notice here is that it has a mode, and you can do 8-bit mode, which I never do because that's reducing the size of the files, 16-bit mode, or 32. 32-bit mode results in the largest possible image and the most data to manipulate later in Photoshop or Camera Raw. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. If I were to choose 16-bit, this screen changes and becomes a toning screen, so that we would actually use this part of the program to actually do our HDR toning. I like to go, particularly in an image like this lighthouse, for say a more subtle HDR image, in which case I'm going to do my toning in Camera Raw and not in the HDR program. So we're going to go ahead and back and select 32-bit, and you'll see that it says complete toning in in Camera Raw. And there's really nothing here that I can do. The slider doesn't work, nothing. So really my only option at this point is to go down to the bottom right-hand corner and choose Tone in ACR. I'm gonna go ahead and hit that, and what you will see is the file is being created. It'll go back into Photoshop as a layer, and Camera Raw will automatically open. So now that Photoshop has merged all of the images into a single image, we're going to start processing it. We're not going to actually use any of the global, which is global adjustments right away. We're going to actually go do some selected adjustments. So we're going to come over here onto the top left, and we're going to select our adjustment brush. You could hit K on the keyboard if you like. What you'll see is we have a brush here. That's what this little circle is. If you want the brush to be bigger or smaller, you can use the left bracket key to go smaller, the right bracket key to go larger, and if you want to change the feather, which is the dash line compared to the solid line, you can hold the Alt or Option key, Shift key, and then do left and right bracket. So a couple of tricks within Photoshop Camera Raw for masking. If you want to see the mask where you're actually painting your mask, you can come over here and have the show mask selected. Currently mine is set to red, so that just shows up well on most pictures that I'm shooting. And then also auto mask, which has it helps the mask find solid lines, so it knows where to stop. So you'll watch as I mask where the masking actually will show up. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to select, we'll start with our sky. So as you can see, the mask is sort of setting itself along the edges of the hard lines of the trees and of the lighthouse, and yet not really getting covering over them. So this is a good, this is as a result actually of the auto mask. So now that we've masked, we're going to go ahead and take the show mask off so we go back and see our clouds as they were. And we're going to start making some adjustments here. So let's go ahead and darken up the sky a little bit because we want this to be ominous and have the lighthouse stand out against it. We also want it to be very dramatic. So we're going to use the clarity slider here and kind of ram that all the way up. We also want to keep the highlights in the clouds visible, so we're going to lighten things a bit. Don't worry about the top yet of the sky, because we're actually going to do some cropping. And then maybe give it a little bit more in the shadows. So now that we're done with our first kind of sweep across the sky, we're going to get a new filter. A new mask. So we're going to go ahead and hit new up here on the right hand side of the bar. You can add, erase, or new. Had we had an instance where our mask had bled over, say, onto the lighthouse, we could have used erase just to clear this. But so far we're so good. So new. In this case, we don't want to darken the foreground. We actually want to lighten it. So let's go ahead and reset our sliders by double clicking on the little triangles. We're going to increase our exposure a little bit and come down and again select show mask. We're going to go ahead and paint onto the reeds here in the front. Get up a little bit closer. All right. So now that we've got our mask painted, you'll also see that there's now a pin here that's green as opposed to up in the top left corner. That one is toned white. That's just showing you that there was an adjustment in this area, but that you're not using it currently, and if you hover over it, it'll show you what it was. All right, so we're going to take show mask off. And now we're going to add a little brightness to the foreground. I'm going to go add a little clarity to the foreground, maybe a hair of saturation, and warming it up a little bit as the light is going down behind us over our shoulder. Okay, So once you've gotten the adjustment set you are looking for, and it's completely personal to what you're going to try to drive here. So it's photo specific, personality specific as well. But once we've gotten something going and we're happy, we're going to actually move this into Photoshop. I do want to do one more mask though, so we're going to go ahead and hit Create New again. We're going to hit Show Mask one more time, and this time we're going to actually make a little bit of change to the lighthouse, and then for that we want to make our mask smaller. So here we're going to go ahead and paint into the white of the lighthouse. Again, we'll come over, double click these little triangles so that we can reset our exposures. We're going to say Show Mask. What we're going to do here is actually brighten up the lighthouse body a little bit. We did a little bit of contrast on it, a little clarity. It's also a contrast feature to get it a little bit crunchier since it is a painted building. And then finally we'll do one more, and in this case we're going to just lighten up the red down here a little bit, and maybe a little bit of saturation in there. All right, so to see what you've done to an image, because in some ways it's like, well, we haven't really done very much, but if you want to know what you've done within your particular adjustment, in this case we're in the brush still, you can just hit Preview. And Preview will show you that the changes we've made pretty dramatic for as few of the as they've been. The next thing and the last thing we're going to do within Camera Raw is go ahead and do a graduated filter. And so we're going to come back up to the top left corner, and we are going to choose this icon here, graduated filter, and it's also the G key on your keyboard. So go ahead and hit that. Now, in this case, because we're using a graduated filter and we want to darken the top of the sky, we don't want any color there, we're going to go ahead and reset everything and then tone down the exposure a little bit. You'll see when you go to use this filter that when you drop it, you get a green dot where it starts, and then the red dot is where it's going to end. And you can actually move these around so that the further down you come with the green one, it kind of puts a darker color in that whole area at the top. So you don't need to start way up here. See how it lightens it? You actually want to start it, depending on your horizon, where it makes the most sense for what you want to darken. In this case, I want to get that whole top section. So we're going to go ahead and add a little bit more clarity. It's also going to go into this filter, a little bit darker. Again, highlights, keep the whites nice and white. And that's it. I think that we're good. Again, if you want to see what you've done with this particular filter, we've gone from a very bright top of the image to kind of dark and moody and ominous. Okay, now that we're done in our Camera Raw adjustments, we're going to go ahead and hit OK. This will actually, as it said, as we hovered over, it's going to commit those changes and bring this image into Photoshop as a layer. I'll let that process finish. Here we go. Now, that's what we were looking at. Let's go ahead and close this. When we were in Camera Raw. Now the thing about HDR Pro in Photoshop is that we just did our toning, our initial toning in Camera Raw, but to tell you the truth, it actually still sees this as a 32-bit image, which is key and relevant because with a 32-bit image, many of the filters, particularly your plugins that you might own, will not work on a 32-bit image. It needs to be a 16 or an 8. So the first thing we want to do when we come in here is actually change this back to a 16-bit image. You'll also see that it came in as a smart object and therefore a smart filter. So you could actually go back and go, no, I don't like this, I want to change something. Should you want, you would just double click it. But first, let's go ahead and convert this into a 16-bit image, and we'll continue moving forward with our adjustments. Here you have, under image, you go to mode, and you'll see that it's still 32-bit. We're going to go ahead and choose 16. To stop and read the warning that Photoshop's giving you. And in this case, we are okay merging the photo. So we merge. What you're going to see happen is the photo changes out from underneath you, and it might not change to something that you want. Sometimes the change is really cool, sometimes it's pretty dramatic and you're like, no, that's overcooked, it's not what I'm looking for. As well as you get toning. And this is the traditional HDR toning panel, the same one we would have received, or we did receive when we tested the 16-bit option within our original merge. In this case, I actually really liked what I got to, and I don't want to have it toned for me. So what you want to do here to get back to what you had in Camera Raw is go ahead and select the drop down arrow where it says local adaptation, and you're going to choose exposure and gamma. What that does is convert it right back to where we had left it out of Camera Raw. If you want, you can experiment in here and see what the different options will do. Sometimes you'll like them, like that's not too bad. And sometimes you might actually want to go to local adaptation and then start toning again. In this case though, I want to go ahead and stick with what I did in Camera Raw, and I don't actually make any adjustments here. It's a personal preference. I actually like to get to where I left it and then start with other options within Photoshop. So we go back to exposure and gamma, we hit OK. Now all we've done here is changed it. It's no longer a smart object, and now we've kind of embedded the changes that Camera Raw gave us. The other thing is you'll see that your document is gotten a lot smaller. It was over 300 or so with coming out of Camera Raw because it was such a big image at 32-bit. All right, so now that we're in here, we're going to do a little bit more adjustment. We're going to go ahead and start with a brightness and contrast. We're going to throw a little bit more contrast in this and maybe a little bit of brightness. All right, so just a little bit there. And then we're also going to straighten this up because the horizon's not straight, and that is one of my pet peeves. So we go ahead and we select our crop tool, and when you do that, you can either, I had already chosen, but you just click on the crop. One of the options that you're going to get is straighten up here in the top option bar. So you're going to go ahead and hit the straighten option, and that's going to allow us to draw a line. Some cases it's real simple. You can see the horizon line, you draw a line straight across. It's not always the case, so we're kind of going to guesstimate it and then maybe make some subtle change just in case it doesn't quite work out. So we kind of know that the lighthouse needs to be straight, so we're going to go ahead and draw one right down the center. There you go. That did actually a pretty good job of straightening up the lighthouse, which is kind of all we really needed. It didn't look like it was tilting. Maybe a hair adjustment. There we go. You also see that it's cropped in. That way it is already cut out for us all of the area it needs to in order to have a solid picture. We're going to go ahead and bring up the bottom a little bit, bring down the top, and then also cut in on the edges a wee bit. Get some of this extraneous stuff out. Okay, we're going to hit enter to accept those changes. All right, cool. So we're almost there. The last thing that we want to do, that I want to do for sure, is to take out this one crazy reed up here in the front that's just too dark. There's a couple of different ways to do that, but we're going to go ahead and go with the patch tool. So if you come back to your left-hand toolbar over here, you'll see this little guy. Now, for many of you, it might show spot healing. The way to get your options up is to click on this and actually right-click on it, and you'll get the whole menu option, or cycle through the J key and this will change. I find that the patch tool is kind of superior in some cases for this. Dust spots, easy, use the spot healing tool, but things like this is a little bit easier to use the patch. The thing to remember when cloning is I could just pick this whole thing and Photoshop might do a good job of replacing it, but there's no real guarantee. It's a lot of data, it's got a lot of things to figure out. So I actually like to do these things in pieces. So we're going to go ahead and just select by holding down the left mouse key and circling the area we want and selecting it. Oops, and I realized I'm on my brightness and contrast. You actually need to be on the layer with data, so go ahead and select, make sure you've got your image selected. And you can see as I hover now, I've left click selected, and then when I let go of the left click, the little ants, the marching ants are there, and when I hover you can see that there's arrows from left to right. At this point, if I just hold down the left key, I'm able to slide this in either direction to pick up what I want to cover. All right, so first one, pretty good. Let's go ahead and do this again. And we're going to keep doing this in these little groups so that Photoshop doesn't have to struggle to figure out what to override. See, like that is an example where I didn't do that right. So we can go ahead and step back. You can either use the step back or you can do control, and you'll need to do it again, because part of that step back was just the movement as opposed to the selection. Or you can use the Command Z key. I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit more dramatic. There we go. All right, 1 or 2 more. And it's got a little bit of fuzz, so you kind of sort of just keep playing with it until you get what you want. And that's not saying I'm not getting what I want here. So we're going to back up a couple of steps. All right, go this way. There we go. All right, the thing about photography is it's an illusion. You know, I know that I've done this, you know that I've done this, but somebody else looking at this might not recognize that there's been some cloning done there. So it's just about playing with it until you get what you want. And recognizing that most people aren't going to look that close to see it. They're going to look at the main part of the picture and not worry about the grass down here. The last thing we want to clone out actually is the wires in this pole. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to pick it, and we are going to, whoops, there we go, select just these things. And you want to pick basically something that matches or is similar. You know, it needs to make sense when you go over this. All right, so those 2 things are gone. So we're getting there. All right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and finish up processing our image, and then I'm going to show you a trick to create a beam of light. In this case, we're going to actually make a beam of light in the lighthouse. But you could use this technique for anything. So you could be a street lamp or a flashlight beam or a headlight beam. It's kind of a cool trick. So we're going to go ahead and do that at the very end just to give you this little nuance. So we're almost done. We're going to do a couple more things. I want to sort of lighten up the foreground a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and select down here at the bottom a new adjustment layer. There's definitely different ways of getting to this. You can either choose it from the panel down here by selecting this half black and half white key. You can come up here and also select adjustments from here if you know what the actual icon looks like, or you hover. And lastly, you can also choose new adjustment layers out of right here, out of the layers menu. The difference between doing adjustment layers from the right hand panel and the or the layers menu up here on the left that I'm highlighting is that when you do these, they on this side they will actually blend right into the image and you don't get a layer created, which means if you don't like the result, you're going to have to back out as opposed to being able to just delete the layer. My habit is to always build an adjustment layer from the layers panel over here. So go ahead and I select, and I'm going to go levels for this. And you can see that my highlights are not all the way over to the edge. So if I just drag that a little bit, you'll see that the image gets a little bit brighter. And that's adjusting the highlights. If I want to do further adjustment to the midtones, I can go ahead and select this little guy. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then if I want to select the darks, I can select them over here. And you can sort of play with this until you get exactly what you want out of it. The darks. I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right. Excellent. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to merge our layers. Actually, I think I made that a bit bright. Nice thing is, because it's a layer, instead of having to now delete it and start over, which I would have had to had I chosen to do it from the layers menu, I can actually just open this up and drag it a little bit and readjust it, and then go ahead and close it up again. Okay, so this last step that we're going to do, because we're nearly done here, is create a light beam. So first and foremost, I want to go ahead and I want to merge these layers together. So we're going to come over to Layer, and we're going to merge Visible. Okay, so there they go. They're all gone. Now the next thing we want to do is create the beam of light. And how I want to structure this is actually have the light, because you can see the light here is sort of facing me. I want to have this beam going out here to the side. So first we're going to come over and we're going to use one of our selection tools. Again, on the left-hand side of the screen, we will come up here and we can either use the lasso or the polygonal. You know, for now I'm going to go ahead with the polygonal, and we're going to create the area that the beam's going to cover. So to do this, we have the tool, you'll see the arrow at the top. We're going to place that arrow right on the light. We're going to tap, and then we're going to hold down the Option key. Just going to tap. You're going to lift it up, no holding of the left click or anything. Hold down your Option key, and then come out, and it'll draw a line wherever you want it to go. Where you figure out where you want your line to drop, go ahead with the Option key selected, tap again, tap again, tap again. We're going to bring this back and tap one final time. Okay, so there's where our beam's going to go. Now that we've done this, we're going to actually duplicate the layer, and we can do that by using Control J or choosing Duplicate Layer. So I like the keystrokes, we're going to go with Control J. And what we've done, although you can't quite see it, if we turn this off, you can see that there's the layer. In here, it just is the same. So we've made our selection and taken it out and separated it. We're going to edit and fill with white. No, we're not. Okay, so now on our final step, we're going to go ahead and create our light beam coming away from the lighthouse. So the first thing we need to do is create a blank layer. So you can either go to Layer, New, and Layer here, or you can actually use the Layer tool down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and just select New Layer. And you'll see that we now have a blank layer. On this blank layer, we're going to go ahead and create the area that our light beam is going to travel. So for that, we're going to select on the the left-hand side in our toolbar, we want to choose one of our selection tools. You can see here that I've right-clicked to see what my options are, and I can either use the lasso tool or the polygonal tool. For this, I'm going to use the polygonal tool because it creates straight lines for me. If you happen to choose the lasso tool, that's okay, but to create a straight line, you'll need to hold down the Alt or Option key. So just to have one less keystroke, I'm going to go with this particular tool. What we're going to do is we're going to left click at the light where the light would start, and you'll see that as we drag, we have a nice straight line. So we're going to drag the light off, about here, and we're going to actually go outside into the gray just because we want the light beam to go the entire length of the rest of the image. We don't want it to stop short on the edge there. So we're going to go ahead and select around such as this. And this actually didn't go where I wanted, so we're going to hit step back. And we're going to try that one more time. So we're going to go over here. There we go. And now we go ahead and get those to get our marching ants. So basically it's a series of left clicks, and you got to go back to exactly where you started to get the lasso tool to complete itself. So now that we have this area selected, we're going to fill with white. So we want to come up to the top of our screen here under Edit, and we're going to say Fill. Go ahead and choose Fill. We're going to get this little dialog box, and we're going to want to fill with white in this particular case. So we're going to hit OK. You'll see how the whole image now, the whole selected area, mind you, is filled, just went to white. And we're going to go Control D or Command D to deselect to get rid of the marching ants. We don't need to look at those any longer. Now clearly this is too white and too severe, the lines. So what we want to do is go ahead and take our opacity down on our new layer. We're going to drag that down a little bit, maybe around 20, 25-ish, right in there, 22. That's a good start. So that's first thing, that's the first step. But again, our lines are too straight. No light beam would create such severe lines. So we want to go ahead and add some blur. To do this, we want to come up again to the top of the screen, and we're going to choose Filter. We're going to come down to our Blur filters, and we're going to choose Gaussian Blur. So go ahead and select that. Now you can see, because I have Preview selected, you can see what's going on with this, and I can drag it and make it more blurry and less blurry just by dragging this slider. So this again is about personal preference, personal style. I want it to be blurry enough to be realistic, but also notable. So maybe around, I don't know, 10 looks good. So we're going to go ahead once we've done that and hit OK. And that's pretty much the completed image. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten my image again, and I do that because it makes it smaller. So you can see down in the furthest left corner where it has the dock size, it's got 80, but because there's multiple layers, it's actually, although it's true size would be 80, flattened, it shows 111. You know, that's pretty big, and some of these images you'll see will go up to about 1 gigabyte when you have a lot of layers. So to avoid that, when you're done and you've considered this finalized, you just go ahead and flatten your layers, and it'll return back to its normal size and save some disk space. So I can come under Layer, flatten image, we'll see that both of these numbers in the bottom corner, now they're both 80, and now I can save my image. So thanks again for watching. That's how to merge images in HDR Pro for your bracketing images. Thank you. Take care.